Hello, everyone, and welcome to the open day for the UAL Diploma in Apple Development at the Creative Computing Institute. My name is Georgina Capdevila, and today we are here to host the second half of the online open day session for the UAL Diploma in Apple Development. Yesterday, we had the chance to learn all about this one-year sandwich course at the CCI, and we got to hear from Joel Gethin-Lewis, who's a course leader at the diploma. We also had the pleasure of having Matt Hanlon, ex-Apple employee, and who's now a trainer of trainers at Apple, and two current students at the course, Sophie and Zach, who shared about their experience being part of this amazing diploma at CCI. If you missed the online session, know that you can find it on our YouTube channel and you can watch it anytime at your own pace because it's going to be available there for you to watch anytime. Today, in the next 45 minutes, we'll have the chance to learn directly from Joel Gethin-Lewis, who's the course leader at the diploma. And Joel will be running you through a taster session where you're going to be able to have an idea of what it may be like to study at the course with him. It's a pleasure to invite Joel to this space. Hello, Joel. Welcome and thanks for being here.
Hey Georgina, how you doing? Hey everyone out there watching along on the stream. I'm really excited to give you a little taster session of what it's like on the UAL Diploma in Apple Development.
Beautiful. The floor is yours, Joel. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Georgina. Okay, so hopefully you should be seeing my screen by now, and I've just put us up on the homepage of the UAL Diploma in Apple Development. And the reason for that is because I just wanted to draw attention to this little icon down here. We are an Apple authorized training center because of the support of Matt Hanlon and the rest of the Train the Trainer team that took me through their training last year. So we're officially authorized by Apple to give some of the higher education curriculum that they've prepared. What does that look like, I hear you shout? Well, it looks exactly like this. This is just having a look on the apple.com official higher education page for the UK, and specifically the app development curriculum. So Apple have been very generous and created a whole series of software platforms, but also learning platforms to support as many people as possible to start building apps for the various different Apple platforms. Swift is the language that we're going to be using to develop in today and over the whole of the Apple Diploma. And Xcode is the software package that we can use to build software. Scrolling down a little bit, there's some information about the curriculums themselves. And specifically, the Develop in Swift curriculum is the one that we're going to be following. So these are 3 incredible textbooks that Apple provides completely for free from their website. And Develop in Swift Explorations and Develop in Swift Fundamentals are the 2 that we'll be covering over the period of the diploma year. Develop in Swift Data Collections is one that can be taken on as a further optional module or developed in their own spare time. It's completely free as well, so students are completely welcome to follow that curriculum. But as I said, explorations and fundamentals form the core of the first block, the first half of teaching in the first 6 months of the Apple Diploma. This is the Apple Diploma homepage, where we can see here the course diagram, the breakdown of how it works over the year of the diploma, broken down into 2 blocks, each taking up roughly a term and a half of time. Coding 1, Product 1, and ML 1. For more information about those, and indeed Coding 2, Product 2, and ML 2, have a look at the YouTube video that Georgina talked about earlier on in this session. But this is a taster session. We've got roughly 40 minutes left to go through some example software and teaching materials from the Apple Diploma itself. And I thought, what better way to do that than actually just to leap in and actually give you a taster of one of the lectures that I give in the Product 1 series, which is in the Block 1 section of the Apple Diploma itself. We're going to be diving straight in at the deep end, looking at lecture 10 of the lecture series. And the reason I've chosen that one is because there's a lovely little app project in there called Color Picker, which I'll be taking you through. The reason I put the sick in there on the link is because that's spelt the American way. just so you know it's not a typo of mine. That's the way it comes through in the literature itself. So let's have a look at the lecture. So here we are. Hi, hello. I like to remind all the students to start off with to remind them to log their attendance through the iOS app for Seats Mobile, which is this great way of registering in attendance that we have across the Creative Computing Institute as a whole, and I believe UAL wide as well. Second of all, there are some group tutorials with Liam Walsh, someone who's been helping us out from the Apple side of things. And then third of all, a meditation. I like to start each one of my lectures with one of those, and the Sitting Still Like a Frog book is an absolutely fantastic one. I'll just click the link here. If you haven't experienced them, they're absolutely fantastic. It's great for students and teachers alike, mindfulness exercises for kids. And the team over there at Shambhala Publications have been generous enough to publish all of those meditations online for free. So I love to pick one of those. The sticker book is also excellent in case you haven't tried it already. Anyway, we're not going to go through the meditation now. We're going to get straight on with some work. First of all, reviewing a few of last year's, the previous session's tutorial lectures. We're not going to go through that now, but we're going to take a little look at some of the color picker guide. Now, this will take you into Swift Explorations. This is the book that we use as the main bulk of the Product 1 unit. And that takes us through a whole block's worth of development. We're going to jump in here immediately into Unit 4, Building Apps. But as you can see here from the table of contents, there's quite an extraordinary number of resources here within the Swift Explorations book. An incredible combination of content and completely free, made available from Apple. So let's get on with this color picker app. What are we going to build today? Well, we are going to build an app that allows you to interactively choose a color. And that is very much like the color mixer interface that you might be familiar with from an app like Photoshop or something like that. So making up a color from 3 components: a red component, a green component, and a blue component. And through this workshop and little taster session, we're going to look at some ways and methods of using Xcode, which is the interactive development environment, or IDE, that I spoke about earlier. Xcode is a great app that's provided completely free by Apple and allows you to make apps for the Mac OS, tvOS, iPadOS, watchOS, and indeed iOS platforms. It's the de facto method of developing software on any of those Apple platforms I just mentioned. So we're going to jump in here using Swift, which is the programming language of choice, and UIKit, which is the application programmer interface that we're concentrating on for this first half of the course. Right now, I'm teaching the current Apple development diploma students Swift UI, which is another way of making apps on the Apple platforms. Okay, so let's get straight into it. Let's make a brand new Xcode project, and we'll use the app template located within the iOS tab. One of the things that's great about some of the Apple provided materials is the level of detail they go on in terms of screenshots. So you can see here, it's really clear what we need to do. Let's switch over to Xcode, and I'm going to go up to here, File, New, and Project. And I'm going to make an iOS app. I'm going to click Next, and I'm going to call it Color Mix, spelling it in the English way. We're going to use the storyboard interface, and the language will be Swift. We don't need to use core data or include testing at this time around. So now it's just going to ask me to save it somewhere. I'm going to save it into block 1, and I'll just put an open day folder right there. So there we go. We've created our project. I'm just going to maximize this so it makes it as obvious as possible. So now we've created that, what's the next step? Well, we are going to add a view to the interface. The view is the construction, the kind of most basic part of the hierarchy of making content in using UIKit And what we're going to be doing that through is through this storyboard interface here. So what we've got here is a simulation of an iPhone screen, and in typical Apple style, we can just start adding content and user interface elements to that layout. So which object are we going to go through? We're going to go for a generic view. So if I just scroll through here, I can see I've got that there. And all I need to do is just drag and drop that onto the interface. And there you go. You can see it's there on the interface. But to make it a bit more obvious, I think we're going to change the background color. So I've already got this set up, editor, canvas, bounds, rectangles. So we can already see the edges of that. But if I go to here, editor, canvas, and bounds rectangles, that will pop up there, giving us the blue outline of the view. You can see it's also popped over here in the view controller scene hierarchy. These are things that will be covered in previous lectures, but for now, I just wanted to show the power of the Xcode and storyboard interface to make interactive apps in interactive time. So there we go, we can see what's going on, and we're going to open up the view controller in the assistant editor. And that will mean that we can edit the code and see that happening in real time. So a link between interface and code itself. Let's make sure we've got the assistant up. There we go. And I'm just going to make a little bit more space on the screen so it's really clear to all of you watching along at home. There we go. As I said, the Apple developer documentation and specifically the Develop in Swift series of books are provided completely free. You can just get those right now for yourself through the Apple Book Store, and they've even got embedded videos. So you can see here the next thing that we need to do, we need to control click from the view and create a new outlet in our code in the viewcontroller.swift file, which is the bit of code that controls the interaction between the interface and the code. So now I've watched that video, I know exactly what to do. I'm going to control drag over to here and create an outlet, and I'm going to call that color view. So what we've done there is we've actually created what's known as an outlet between the view in the storyboard, which allows us to lay out user interface elements graphically, and the source code that we've got going on here on the right. It's a really beautiful way of making these interactions happen, and we can prove that that connections happen. When I mouse over this little line number here, you can see that it links up to the color view I've got right there. Fantastic, that's there for us to use. Great, let's go on to the next page. Right, so we've got that circle there, as it says, breaking down the bit of code that we've just created. As it's filled in, it indicates that we've got a connected outlet. The @IB outlet weak bit of text is a signal to Xcode that the property on this line is an outlet. And we've got this var color view. This is the declaration of a property. This is something that we've already encountered earlier on in the course. The type of the view, of the property rather, is a UI view. The exclamation point means that if the outlet isn't connected and you try to access the property, the app will crash. But luckily, as it is connected and it's always going to be there, we're not going to have to worry about it this time. The important thing to remember is that as we use color view in the view controller code, we're referring to the view that we've just added to the storyboard. This is one of the things I love about the Apple development environment, is it allows me to link between drawing effectively an interface visually and then typing code and making the blend of those two things happen. So now what we're going to do is we're going to prove we've got programmatic control of that view by editing the viewDidLoad function. The viewDidLoad function is one that's built for us automatically using the iOS app template that we did right at the beginning when we made that Xcode project. And that is the function that is called automatically when the view is ready to appear on the screen, the view controller, I should say. So inside that, we're going to add a little bit of code. Color view dot background color equals dot black. Let's see what happens. So here's our viewDidLoad function. I'm going to write color view. You can see that's auto-completing for me in the Xcode interface, which is fantastic. I can just press tab to say, yes, I'd like that to auto-complete. Background color. And then I'm going to set that to be black. Again, just pressing tab there, almost as if the code is writing itself. One of the fantastic things about developing with Xcode is it provides an iPhone simulator for you. So you don't even have to run your code on an iPhone itself. You can actually run it in a simulator on your laptop or desktop Mac computer, and then that will actually emulate the entire iOS environment. So you can really start coding, checking your code, and not having to run it on the app, on the device itself. This is fantastic for students as well, as it means they can just get things going on any laptop out there. So if I just press play, you'll see that that gets built almost immediately, and then the simulator will be launched, connected automatically. At the moment, I'm emulating the iPhone 14 Pro, which is the one that I like to use. As we're waiting to attach there, that's just going to run on the simulator. Here you go. You can see our simulator has popped up now. This is running an entire operating system of iOS, and you can see our view background color has changed there to black, indicating that our code is working. The thing that's really amazing about this is in fact an entirely interactive version of the entire operating system. We've actually got absolutely everything running here as if you would find on a real iPhone device, which is kind of extraordinary that we can run an entire iPhone on top of our existing operating system. I'm just going to run that again. There you can see color mix is functioning perfectly. Great, so we've got that working. Let's switch over and see what the next step is. So luckily, we've managed to build our app with no errors at all. And this is actually just a little bit of helpful code and documentation that shows what to happen if you did get a crash happening, but we've been lucky enough to get away with that without that happening. So let's keep going. So a little summary of where we've got to so far. We've used the assistant editor to see our code side by side with the storyboard. The storyboard is where we define the interface of our app visually. We've control drag from the storyboard to our code to create and connect outlets. And we've used those outlets within our code to change the properties of objects created within the storyboard. As I said before, this is one of the lovely things about developing on the Mac and for iOS or any of the other operating systems that Apple releases. There's this beautiful mix between creating things visually and then creating code. And the latest version of the Apple APIs using SwiftUI, it takes it even further. But we're concentrating on UIKit for this earlier introductory part of the course. Okay, so we've got this view now that we can control, this little rectangle that we can change the background color of. But what would we like to do next? Well, this is the next step, is we're going to make a switch. And that switch will allow us to press it interactively and change the background color of the view in real time. So this is what we're going to be aiming for. We're going to have this little switch here in the middle of the screen, and that'll allow us to change the background color of our view. So how are we going to do that? So we need to open up that object library again and drag it onto the scene, and we'll move it to center it horizontally and vertically. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to move up the view from where it was before. I think roughly about there looks good. I'm going to go here into the object library, and I'm just going to type switch. Look, there we go. And I can just drag that in there in real time and leave it in the middle of our storyboard. Okay, now we've got that switch there. I think it's asking me to change the value of the switch to be off. So I need to just change the state up here to be off. So what I can do is I can bring up the attributes window over here. I will click on this switch, and then I will switch that to be off. You'll see that that's reflected instantaneously in the preview of the user interface that I can see here, the storyboard, which is where everything graphically is happening. It's a really intuitive way of developing apps. Okay, now I've got that switch to off, I need to do what is known as an action. And what that allows me to do is not just take a variable as we saw before with an outlet, but an action that is triggered when the user interacts with that user interface element. So let's see how that happens. So what I do is I select the switch, I control drag as I did before, and this time I'm going to go below the viewDidLoad function, and I'm going to make a new function there. What shall I call it? Let's see what it advises me to call it here. Oh, switch change. That's a good one. Okay, so switch changed. And I need to make sure that action is selected. Yep, I've got that selected already here. And then we need to make sure that UI switch is the type. The reason for that is, will become clear in a second, it will mean that we can manipulate that UI switch directly when that action is triggered by the user pressing that button. Okay, so what have we got happening here? We've got a little explanation of this. First of all, we've got a circle again, and you can see as I mouse over as before, I can show that that switch is the one that's being referenced by that action. We've got the @IB action. This line signals to Xcode that the method on this line is an action connected to a control in the interface builder, which is the storyboard section of the interface that we can see there. Then the sender. The sender argument is the user interface element that initiated the action. We chose UI switch since we know that this is the kind of storyboard object connected to this IB action. We're going to add the following bit of code inside the method. Okay, so we're going to say color view dot background color, and instead of being black as it was before, we're going to say red. So that means that when the switch is triggered, that background view color, that color view background color rather, should be switched automatically to red. Let's see if that works. Okay, so I'm building that, it succeeded. I'm going over here, the background's gone to black as I specified in the view did load function. Now I press the switch, great, we've got some interaction going on here. It's flicking over to be red. If I switch it back though, we've got a little bit of a problem here. It's not exactly the most useful interaction, right? I need to switch here, that when it actually switches to off, this should switch back to being black, because at the moment it just switches to red once and once only. That's not great. So how can I deal with that? Luckily, we've got a little bit of code here already. As it says, when you turn the switch on, the view changes to red, but when you switch it off, it stays red. What's going on? It's because the action method is called every time the value of the switch changes, and the action method always sets the background color to be red. So what we're going to do here is we're going to add a little if statement. An if statement is one of the most standard and most useful and functional bits of logic that is implemented in pretty much every single programming language out there. And what it allows you to do is to test for the binary truth of a situation. So what we're going to say here is if sender dot is on, that means if the switch that is the sender that triggers this action is on, then we should do the little bit of code that's here between these two curly brackets. You see I've highlighted it there in pink. Else, if that isn't true, execute this bit of code here, setting the color view background color to be black. What this means is if the switch has been switched to on, change the background color to be red, else or otherwise switch the background color of the color view to be black. So let's add that little bit of logic in there and we'll see if this fixes our problem. So if sender is on, again, I'm just auto completing here. One of the great things about Xcode is that it has this intelligence about it that allows me to start writing logic, and it makes intelligent guesses based on what I've written already. You can see already it's got a little error. It's saying, come on, where's the curly brackets? Very impatient. Okay, I'll put it in. So if the sender is on, we want to set the color view, and we want to set its background color, and we want to set that to be red. Great. And then else, we want to set the color view background color to be black, to set it back to what it was before. Okay, let's see if that's fixed our bug. Again, it's working in the simulator, and there we go. I have got a switch, a functioning switch that goes from red to black and back and forth. Well, that's it. That's the end of the session. No, I'm only joking. There's $1 billion app potential there, but I think there are a few more features to be added before we get into that. Okay. So we've got that's really the classic development loop that you'll see again and again and again when you're developing. You add a feature, it doesn't quite work the way you want, then you add a little bit more code, fix the problem, and keep on going. This kind of iterative view to development, a view that is really useful and actually realistic. This is one of the things that I love about the Apple Diploma. Using these fantastic Apple materials, we can get a realistic developer's eye view of how great apps are actually developed step by step. Okay, we've got that section done now. What have we got? IsOn is a Boolean property. That means a true or false property of UI switch that describes a switch is on or not. The updated version of this method now checks the state of the switch, which is available as the sender argument of the function, and sets the color appropriately. So what have we done in this lesson now? We've learned how to connect controls in the storyboard to action methods in the code. We've learned how to get information about the control from the sender argument and how to use a UI switch. Okay, so next step, part 3, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to get multiple actions and outlets going. What we're going to have is 3 components now, a red one, a green one, and a blue one. We're going to add 2 more switches to the app so that we have 1 switch for red, 1 for green, and 1 for blue. Each of those being switched on or off will add that color component to the color displayed on the screen. So we'll need to create outlets for each switch so that the IsOn property of each switch can be checked when creating the color to be displayed. And at the end, the app will look a little something like this. Okay, so we're going to select the switch in the main storyboard and we're going to duplicate it using Command D. And then we're going to drag it underneath the first one, using the guides to line it up. And we'll do that 3 times. Then we're going to control drag from each switch the code file to create outlets for the red switch, the green switch, and the blue switch. So let's get that going. I've selected the switch there. I'm pressing Apple D to duplicate it. And then I'm going to Apple D duplicate it again. Now these are all on top of each other, so I better move these down a little bit. You can see here I've got these beautifully done automatic guides, very similar to the ones that you can get in Keynote to make sure that everything is laid out beautifully. Now if I just move that up and down a bit, I should be able to, exactly get it going there. Perfect. Okay, so I've got those 3 switches in there. Now I need to make outlets for each of those. And as it said, I'm going to call them, what am I going to call them? Red switch, green switch, and blue switch. So control dragging, see this blue line coming up. I'm going to call that one red switch. And we're going to call this one red, green, blue. We're going to call this green switch. And we're going to do this one as well. And we're going to call that blue switch. Okay, I'm just going to tidy those up a little bit. Now we've got those 3 outlets in there. So that means we can now programmatically access each of the red, green, and blue switches. And if you notice, this has also been updated over here in the view controller scene. Those names have automatically been taken over by Xcode and made into sensible versions. Even though I didn't use spaces in the name, spaces in the name over here. It's very smart. Okay, as it says here, this is a common technique is to connect outlets and actions to the same object. We're going to select the middle switch and open to the connections inspector in the utilities area. So I select the green switch, and then here looking at the connections. So you can see here that as I move up and down, when the value is changed, the switch changed action is going to be triggered. That's because we duplicated these. So as we duplicated, you can see that now all 3 of these are connected to this action. That means that whenever any of these 3 switches is triggered or switched, this action, the switch change one, was going to be automatically called. Fantastic. So we're going to do a little thing here of actually disconnecting one of these values, and then we can show how to reconnect it. So if I go to the green switch, red, green, blue, so the middle switch here, green switch, I can actually press the X here to cancel the connection. As I press that, you'll see now if I highlight here, only the red switch and the blue switch are connected. Well, we didn't really mean to do that, but we did it anyway. But this is just to go through an exercise of how to reconnect it. So that's now been disconnected. How do I do that? Well, let's watch the video and it'll tell me how to do it. I've disconnected it, I've cancelled it, but I can reconnect it really easily just by dragging and dropping straight over to the green switch. And that means now when the green switch is switched, it will automatically run that action as before. And I'll just show you how to do that. It's as simple as that. And now all three are connected. This has popped in again here, and everything has been reconnected together beautifully. Thanks, Apple. Okay. As it says here, there's many ways to connect outlets and actions. You can control drag from the storyboard, can create new outlets and actions. Once they're in place, they can be connected, disconnected, and reconnected from the connections inspector or from the circle icons and code files. Which is better? Well, use the connection inspector if you want to know which outlets and actions a particular object in the storyboard is connected to. Use the circle icons and code if you know which objects a particular outlet or action is connected to. There's many ways to approach it. All right, now we've created our user interface and connected all the outlets and actions, it's time to write some code. The action method is not the best place to update the color of the view. There's already some repeated code in the file. And as I always say to my students on the Apple Diploma, all programmers are lazy like foxes, and we don't like to repeat anything if we possibly can avoid that. The color is being set to black in view_did_load, and again when the switch is being turned off. A better design is to have a single function that makes the correct color based on the state of each switch, and to call this from the action method and from view_did_load. That way there's no repeated code at all or logic. If different actions are added that can also update the color, we can call this new function as well. So we're going to add the following code to the view controller class. Okay, just to save a little bit of time, I can copy and paste this. So I've selected that, I'm going to copy, and I'm going to go over into the view controller class. And between those two, I'm going to copy and paste that. Well, it being Apple, of course, it's put in some quote marks here and some other unnecessary stuff and a copyright notice, but I can just copy and paste those out and we're fine. Just because I'm spelling all of this in English, not American, I'm going to change let to be color, spelled correctly. And I'm also going to update this not to be color view, spelled the American way. I'm going to change it to be color view, spelled the British way. You can see that that's automatically gone to green to indicate that that is a user, that's a variable name that's already valid in the Xcode source file that we're working with. Hopefully all these little errors should disappear. Oh, need to change that to be color, spelt the English way as well. Now that should turn, yes, now all our errors have disappeared. Fantastic. Okay, I've added that bit in there. What's going on? Well, first of all, it makes 3 new variables, red, green, and blue. And then it checks to see if the switches for the red, green, and blue switches are on. If they are, it sets the respective variables to be those values. Finally, then it combines those all together to make a new constant value, color, which is a UI of type UI color, which is made up of all those different values that we've just switched to be 0 or to 1, and then it sets the value to be color. Okay, what do we do next? Well, we need to make sure that we're calling that new bit of code. So what I need to do now is I need to call update color here. And I can also call it here, get rid of the whole switch changed function that I had before, and just say update color. A much nicer, simpler bit of code. Both the view_did_load functions are now, the view_did_load function and the switch change functions are calling update color, this new bit of code that we've made that deals with all eventualities of what we want to do. So let's build it again. Let's see where we've got to. There we go, build succeeded. I turn it on, I've got a red component on. Oh, I've got yellow now because I'm mixing red and green components. And then again, going completely white. If I've got 100% red, 100% green, and 100% blue, that's the color I'm going to get. If I'm mixing red and blue together, I get purple. If I turn off red, I just get pure blue. And just to prove that I can get green, I'll turn that one on there. Cyan, my favorite combination of complementary, rather I should say, pure RGB values. Okay, so we've now got an interface of 3 interactive elements working together to make a real-time response to us, making this view's background color change in real time. Okay, so what have we learned? We've learned that a single object can be connected to both outlets and action. We've learned how to use the connections inspector to check outlets and actions. We've learned how to disconnect outlets and actions using the connections inspector. And we've learned how to link an object to an existing outlet or action using the circle icon in the getter of a code file. Right, so now we've got those bits functioning, we want to take it to the next step. We want to use slider controls, like the brightness or volume sliders on an iOS device. And at the end of this chapter, our app is going to look like this. We're going to have some switches, but we're also going to have some sliders to be able to mix between all the colors of the rainbow. Fantastic. Okay, now we need to adjust our user interface. So we need to shift over our switches and we need to move them over so that they're on the left margin guide. So I can select all four of them, three of them I should say, and I can move them over here to be aligned with the left margin. Great. Now, because we're interacting with this with our fingers, let's make a little bit more space. So I'm just clicking on those and then using the arrow keys on the keyboard to make a bit more space. So that just allows me to switch these things off and on without them accidentally touching each other. Great. Okay, what's the next step? Okay, we're going to have to add some sliders in here. And we're going to do this for each one of the switches. So we're going to align them to those. And we want to set them all of the value of them to be 1 in the attribute, in the attributes inspector. So let's do that. So here we are going into the object library again, picking slider. And there we go, just popping it in 1 at a time. Just going to put it roughly there. That's fantastic. And just to speed the process up, I'm just going to actually duplicate that as we did before. And I'm going to make sure those are all correctly aligned with each other. And I'm just going to move them down there. You can see these little helpers coming in automatically. I'll move that over a little bit just so they're aligned. Look at that, perfect alignment, fantastic. Now I need to make sure in the attributes inspector that those are set to the default value of 1. They're at 0.5 at the moment. We want to be going 1 full on to start with. Doing that for each of the 3. Great, we've got those working. And now we need to drag from each of the slider to create outlets for those. We're going to call them red slider, green slider, and blue slider. Okay, I like to keep it nice and organized, so I'll keep this here. I'm going to add in these outlets below the existing ones I have for the red switch, the green switch, and the blue switch. So there we go. Red slider. And the green slider. And the blue slider. Great. So I've got all 3 of those in there ready to be actioned, and I can move my mouse over them just to check they're working. They've also been renamed over here. Great. So now we've made that happen. We need to make a new action called slider changed. So we'll just add that in here. Control dragging again. And we're going to call that slider changed. We're going to make sure that's of type UI slider. Now to save some time again, instead of having to drag again over, we can actually drag back now and make sure that that's going to be triggered now whenever any of the red, green, or blue sliders are done. This is the beauty of having a user interface that you can just drag and drop to make. I can make these changes incredibly quickly, almost like drawing with code. Okay, so now we are going to make sure that when that slider change action is triggered, we're going to call update color. And here, instead of setting these values just to be 1 in each of these cases, just this binary 0 or 1, we're going to set those to actually be the value of the slider themselves. So here you can see again, I'm going to copy and paste that over just to save a little bit of time. And there we go. Red equals CG float red slider dot value. What that's doing is taking the value between 0 and 1 of the slider and then copying that over to the red component value that we're using to mix all the colors. I'm going to copy and paste these in here as well, making sure to change the value in each case to be the correct one. So green should go with green and blue should go with blue. Okay, this looks pretty good.
Hey, Joel, just a quick interruption to say we've got 5 minutes left.
Okay, 5 minutes left. Okay, let's see
Thank
if I can rocket through this little bit. I will build again. And hopefully what we should have now is a beautiful interface. Here we go. I'm going to set each of these switches on. And now you can see that as I'm dragging backwards and forwards, I'm actually getting all the different color possibilities here. So when these switches are on, it's taking the input value from each of these. Absolutely fantastic. I can now make basically every single possible color that can be made under the RGB spectrum, which is the standard way of mixing color. Any of you who've done any HTML development will know that that's the way things happen, or anyone who's used Photoshop for that matter. It's kind of extraordinary to me that you can make an interface this quickly using Apple's tools and make it basically in real time. This is the kind of thing that would have taken a long amount of time when you're using something else previously, where you wouldn't have been able to mix between these two paradigms of drawing on screen and then taking that information in and manipulating it with a more traditional coding technique that we can see here on the right. Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to go for my final little push. Let's make sure we've got a reset button in there. So we're going to add a button at the bottom of the interface. I'm going to just move this over here to make a little bit more space for myself. I'm going to jump in there and I'm going to see if I've got a button. Oh, I should be over here in the view controller and then that will let me do it. Yes, here we have a button. I'm just going to pop that down at the bottom. I'm going to change that to be called reset. I'm going to create a little action for that, again, by control dragging straight over there. And I'm going to call that reset. I'm going to say that's come from a UI button. Great. Okay, so what we need to do now is we need to actually change that little bit of code. What's that going to do? That's going to that's going to change the value of each of those things to be off. So let's say let's change each of those value to be 1. So we'll say red switch is on is equal to false. And we're going to say green switch, is on is equal to false. And we're going to say blue switch is on is equal to false. And we're going to also set all of those values of the red slider. Dot value is going to be 1. The green slider dot value is going to be equal to 1, and the blue slider dot value is going to be equal to 1. 0. And at the end, we're going to call update color to display that all on screen. Let's see if that works. So here we go, turning my switches on. I get all those values happening. I press reset, everything switches back. I get black. How extraordinary. Well, there we go. We've managed to rocket through the creation of a very simple app that nonetheless demonstrates some critical bits of functionality from the user interface. We use UIKit, storyboards, and raw Swift programming code to make an interactive app that emulates something like a color mixer or a color picker out of Photoshop or a similar bit of code. And we've done that in 45 minutes flat. So thank you so much for being here for this little example session. I can't wait to welcome you to the Apple Diploma proper. And thanks so much for being part of today. Georgina, I'll pass back over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Joel, for delivering this brilliant session. And thanks to everyone who followed along. I hope it was an insightful, useful taster session and that it got you excited about joining us here at CCI for the UAL Diploma in Apple Development. If you have any more questions about the course, I encourage you to follow along the session that we ran yesterday, which covered more specifics about the course, like the course structure, the units, the kind of projects that you'll be developing at the course. We got to hear from Zach and Sophie, who are current students, so you can hear a little bit more about their own experience at the course. So please head to our YouTube channel and find that video because it's going to be super helpful if you're interested in joining us. And if you have any other questions, very specific questions about the course or the application process, you can email us at cci@arts.ac.uk. In the meantime, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on social media on Twitter and Instagram on UAL_CCI to stay in the loop about future events and opportunities here at CCI. And in the meantime, take care, everyone. We look forward to meeting you in real life very soon. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Joel.
Thanks. Bye.
Hello.